You are listening to the Everything Ham Radio podcast. This is episode number 70, and today we're going to be talking about remote control devices with a special guest, a Jason Howard, Kilo 6 Delta November Golf. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Everything Ham Radio podcast. My name is Curtis, my call sign is Kilo 5 Charlie Lima Mike, and I am the host of this podcast. This podcast is released every Thursday morning. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/Everything Ham Radio, or the page at facebook.com/Everything Ham Radio. I'm on YouTube at youtube.com/Everything Ham Radio, and on Twitter at K5CLM. You can find all of the stuff that we're going to be talking about, as well as all of the links. I highly recommend that you check out the show notes, because there is a lot of links in this episode, so make sure that you do that as well. You can find those at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/70. That's the number 70. Like I said, today we are talking with Jason Howard. His call sign is Kilo 6 Delta November George. He is from the Bay Area and a friend of George over at Ham Radio 360. We have an awesome conversation today about RC, basically everything RC. Drones, helicopters, quadcopters, airplanes, all that good stuff. It's a little bit off topic on ham radio for this podcast, but they do kind of merge together because you can use amateur radio in RC controlled vehicles. There is a spectrum of what I thought was the 6 meter band, but turns out it's actually the 440 band. Honestly, I could have swore it was 6 meter, but he says it's actually 440. So we'll talk a little bit about that and the pros and cons and stuff like that of using ham radio equipment with that. It's kind of lengthy, so we're going to go ahead and get started with the interview with Jason. Hey everybody, we are here with Jason Howard. His call sign is Kilo 6 Delta Golf November. We're going to be talking about remote controlled drones, airplanes, boats, cars, all that good stuff. I've wanted to do this topic now for about 2.5 years or so. It was one of the initial blog posts that I had when I actually started just my blog 2.5 years ago. And I had the draft blog post sitting in queue waiting to be written up until about a month and a half ago or so, when my good buddy George hooked me up with Jason. So Jason was kind enough to come on the show today and talk to us about it. So Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started with amateur radio?
Well, first, I just want to say, Curtis, thanks so much for having me on. I'm pretty excited. I've been looking forward to this for weeks, honestly, since you first contacted me. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a little bit about me. I first got, I'll try and keep this a little brief. I'm not going to give you my whole life story. But back in like 2008, 2009, I was struggling to find like a hobby. Tried to learn how to play the piano. I don't have a brain for music. And a friend of mine was telling me about they fly RC model helicopters at this airfield out in Fremont, California, which isn't too far from where I live. And so I went out there and I watched them fly these really complicated looking model helicopters, complete with collective pitch rotors, collective pitch tail blades, all radio controlled. And I went out there and I'm just like, man, that is hardcore. And I wanted to get into it. And so I saved my pennies and I built a model. And the guy at the hobby store, his name was Victor, he was like, nope, you did that wrong. You put that on upside down, and this is wrong, and that's wrong, and go back and try it again. And, and I tried to bring it back a few times, and he finally did a flight for me. So a test flight, basically, and it had these landing gear on it, which are these sticks with, like, ping pong balls at the end. And I did that for about a year and a half. And then I started flying fixed wing, and then I got into RC cars, and I just had the RC bug, like, hardcore.
So you actually went helicopter before you went airplane?
I did. And
wow.
Funny note, too, is I was talking with the guys, and one of the guys said, "Yeah, I was like this older guy, and he'd probably been flying for 30 years, and he's like, learning how to fly a model helicopter is like balancing a greased bowling ball on top of another greased bowling ball."
I could see
And
that.
he was not wrong. He was not wrong at all. Helicopters do not want to fly. You have to want to fly more than they don't want to fly. So, especially back then, when all you had was a heading hold gyro, which just kept the helicopter pointing in the same direction, and that's all the assistance that you got.
Wow.
Before that, you didn't even have a gyro. It was just you and physics. So, which is pretty crazy. And so yeah, with lots and lots and lots of practice, after about a year and a half, about a year, I was in full forward flight, which just means you can fly in any direction you want. You can stop, you can turn around. And then another 6 months later, I was doing some very light 3D. These electric helicopters and gas and all the other versions, a lot of them are powerful enough. They can even fly straight up upside down. They can hover upside down by doing negative pitch with this collective blade. So your blades are actually sitting at a negative pitch to fly upside down. And I never got quite that good, but I did some loop-de-loops and things like that, and that was about the best I could do. But I just found it awfully stressful, and I transitioned kind of more over to airplanes and things like that. And right around that time, I started learning about these new multi-rotors, these quadcopters. And way back then, some of the very first ones, they literally took 3 heading hold gyros from a helicopter and oriented them so that one was X, Y, and Z location, one for each, wired those directly to the motors somehow, and that, again, it was sort of you and physics, and there was not much to it. And then slowly but surely, these little flight controllers and stuff started coming out. There were these guys that made this thing called a multi-Wii, WII, and what they did is they were taking apart Wii remotes from the Nintendo. What was it called? The Wii, right?
The Wii.
The Wii. And they were taking those apart and desoldering the little gyroscopes and stuff out of them and putting them on PCBs, which was just an amazing. I mean, that's such a ham thing too, right? It's like ultra homebrew, and
something I never would have thought about.
Yeah, exactly. But it was the cheapest place to get gyros. So that was really cool. And then with these quads, or quadcopters and multi-rotors, I started learning about first-person view flying, where you put on a pair of goggles and you had a video receiver, and there was a little camera on your aircraft, and that had a little transmitter on it, and it would transmit video to your eyeballs, basically. And then there was also this other thing. It's like, well, that's really cool and all, but I can't really fly that far away. And so there were these sort of new UHF-based transmit receiver setups where you took this UHF receiver and you put it in your aircraft, and it had this big, giant 400 megahertz dipole antenna sticking out, and you got to figure out where to put that thing.
Oh, nice.
And then you had your radio, and most radios in the RC world have a trainer port on the back. The two major kind of big brands, there's lots of different brands, but especially back then, the two major brands were Spectrum and Futaba. Spectrum is spelled with a K for anyone listening. And, Futaba, of course, they basically set the standard. They're the gold standard in RC. But, and the cool thing is with Futaba is that their trainer port has power on it. So you can take this UHF transmitter, plug it straight into the trainer port on the back of the radio, and that would actually power this other transmitter. And if you got the right kind of radio, you could even turn the radio on, and the transmitter that's built into the radio will be off. And so that way you're not powering a 2.4 gigahertz parts 95 radio along with a 70 centimeter transmitter as well, because that would be just a waste of power. It wouldn't really interfere with anything, but since they're both transmitters, but that's pretty much how you want to run it. With Spectrum, you needed to power the transmitter with a separate battery because there's no power on it. So I got myself a Futaba radio, and I started looking at the rules and the laws and stuff, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to have to get a ham radio license. I'll see what this is all about. And I had kind of heard about it, but I wasn't really enthused about it. And I went out and got the ARRL handbook for the technician license, and I started reading through it, and I'm like, you could talk to satellites? Like, that's pretty hardcore. So, and again, I started reading more, and I'm like, wow, you could do microwave, and you get unfettered access to 300 gigahertz and above. Like, I'm ever going to do that, but I'm sure there are people out there that are like, yeah, and I do that every day, and it's awesome.
Right.
So I started reading about all these cool things you could do. Do packet radio, and it's super slow, but it's super neat. And there's just this kind of whole, I wouldn't say underground, but there's this sort of builder community around ham too. And I've always been kind of a nerd. I've been building computers since the 90s and not really a whole lot of soldering or anything like that. But remember those electronics kits, 130 in one, had the little springs on the little board, and I would try and see how hot I could make a diode glow before it burnt out, even though it wasn't supposed to make any light in the first place. I'm like, boop, oh, well, that was fun. That lasted 5 seconds. Let's try a 12-volt battery next and see what happens. So I've always been a bit of a nerd and dabbled a little bit with Linux and definitely a lot with PC hardware and PC gaming and real PC-centric. And so I started learning more and more about ham radio and how you can talk, do voice. Eventually you could do, shortwave was sort of the what's the word I'm looking for? What's it called when you're not when you don't know any better? Layman's term, for it. It's like, oh no, it's still technically shortwave. But anyway, I'm rambling. And you could do all this stuff. And of course with Technician, doing any kind of the lower frequencies and stuff like that, you need more of a license, a higher license to talk on that stuff. But you guys all know that already. And I just basically fell in love with ham radio. I really did. And before I knew it, I took the test. 6 months later, I was a general, and so I was starting to get into low frequency. And I got myself an awesome little Yaesu FT400 or FT450D. It was a great radio. It was my first new radio. And got a little random wire antenna. And before I knew it, I wasn't flying anymore.
Uh-oh.
But I did fly for a while, and I was able to blend the two for a while too, where I had my FPV quadcopter, and I had my goggles, and I had all my batteries and all my gear, and I've actually got a great video of one of the antenna shootouts that the Bayside RC group did down at Hellier Park down in South San Jose, and it was a great video. I'm really happy with that video, and I actually ended up taking that quad and a few other things out to New Zealand in 2014, and got some great video of that, which I really need to put on YouTube. And so I was using, I had my proper license, and I was using ham radio to properly control RC aircraft. And lately, I do still love ham radio. I got a mobile in my car. We'll probably end up talking more about that later. But right now, I've just been kind of trying to focus a little more on getting back into RC and stuff like that, because I've been away from it for a while. So having a lot of fun. Went flying today, in fact, and all parts 95 gear today. But just really enjoying getting back to that.
Right. So with using amateur radio with RC stuff, I'm thinking it's like the 6 meter band. Am I right on that?
No, it's just plain old boring 70 centimeters for control. Yeah, it's just for UHF.
I seem to remember. I thought I remembered somewhere that it was like 6 meters that you did. That's pretty neat. So, what is the advantages of using ham frequencies over the regular Part 95 stuff?
So yeah, the major advantage really is just range. And also, I've never seen anyone get locked out, believe it or not, at 70 centimeter. In fact, there's a specific exemption in ham radio where using it to control there's all my using ham radio to control an aircraft, an RC aircraft, you are allowed to encrypt that. That is your kind of one exemption for encrypting a ham radio transmission. So that is encrypted, and it also, I want to say it was in the last 5 or 10 years, they also allow frequency hopping. So you still get that, that spectrum frequency hopping technology that you get with some of the more off-the-shelf Parts 95 stuff that you get, whereas before that wasn't necessarily allowed either. So it's really cool that those exemptions were allowed. But really the main thing you're getting is range. Almost everything else, honestly, is kind of a disadvantage, because with 70 centimeter, the gear I was using used this goofy dipole setup, and you had to figure out where to put that antenna on your aircraft. With a 2.4 gigahertz off-the-shelf stuff, you got a little antenna. The actual exposed part of the antenna is about an inch long, and you can stick that just about anywhere. So range is really what you're getting out of it.
Cool. So what kind of range do you get compared to Part 95 stuff?
So with Part 95 stuff, if you're in a real RF quiet area, you can eke out a mile. I generally will tell people as far as you can see it, because most of the time when you're flying regular off-the-shelf gear, you're not going to fly, long distance FPV or first person view or anything like that. So I usually tell people the range is as far as you dare, basically. You're gonna lose sight of it before you lose control of it, for sure. Unless you can.
That was always my worry. I started way back when I was in college, back in 97, 98, something like that. There was a little hobby shop down the road from me, and they sold airplanes. I'm like, I've always wanted to do this. I've always had the little cheap things that you buy at like Toys R Us or something like that, and tried to fly it and did pretty good. I got this little training video. Do this when it's coming towards you, and turn this way when it's going away from you, and stuff like that. And I bet you I watched that video, I don't know, probably 1,000 times, getting ready to fly this airplane. And I didn't know of any clubs or anything out there. I'm sure there probably was. I mean, I would call it the Phoenix, so I'm sure there probably was. But I got the aircraft, and I brought it home, and it was a foam body one. It had like a I don't know, like a 46-inch wingspan. It was like a trainer plane.
Oh yeah.
And so I got the body all put together, and I went to put the wings together, and it said, okay, put it on the floor, and put little books on each end to hold the wings upright, and tape it down the middle, and don't take it up because you'll ruin the wings. Well, I messed up and took it out and had to take it off, and I ruined the wings. And that was about the gist of my radio controlled experience with major, stuff.
Yeah, well, and especially back then, there were really only two kinds of radios back then. You had AM, which was on a lot of the cheaper stuff, and usually it just had this little dinky little kind of wire hanging out with maybe a little piece of plastic on the end so you don't poke your eye out. And then you had the higher end FM radio gear, and those had a big dipole or a big telescoping antenna that you'd pull out. It'd probably be 4 or 5 feet long, and you actually got really good range with those. You could easily fly half a mile to a mile with that gear. And a lot of the planes back then too, you'd take your FM radio receiver in your aircraft, and what a lot of people usually did is they would either string it from the canopy back to the tail vertical stabilizer, or even easier than that, you just dangle it down the bottom of the airplane, and you could just fly forever with that sort of setup. And now everything is 2.4 gigahertz as far as off-the-shelf stuff goes. But today I saw a guy with an FM radio. He's like, I've had it since 95. It's never broken up. Literally, he said that today. I've had it since 95, and I've never had a problem with it. So it's like, cool, man, rocking. And nowadays, you don't even need to worry about being on a particular frequency with FM, because you're probably the only guy there with an FM radio. Mm-hmm. Whereas back in the day, even back in 2009 when I started, people had these frequency clips, and you'd go to the coordinator, and there'd be a little shack, and there'd be this big board with a bunch of frequencies on it, and you'd grab your clip and clip it to your radio so people knew you were on that frequency. Otherwise, if somebody else were to turn their radio on, they might lock you out of your airplane while it's in the air, and that's no fun.
Have you ever had that happen to you?
I've never flown FM, now that I think about it. So I've never had
even with like 2.4.
I've personally never had it. It is possible to get locked out of your plane. They literally call it a lockout. And if that happens, well, I take it back. It locked out once. There's some kind of weird anomaly. There's a place out here called Baylands Park. It's just north of Sunnyvale, just north of the 152 freeway, if I remember correctly. I'm not going to pull up a map. It's a great little park. There's a guy there named Ray. He kind of helps wrangle all of us idiots and tries to keep us, because it's a park. It's a public park, and people go out there and fly kites and throw the ball around and stuff like that. And so we have all got to try and be, we have to share the park, really. We can't be like, well, we're here and we've got our airplanes and we're more important than everybody else. Obviously, you can't do that. So. But so to answer the other half of your question, with UHF, a mile is real easy with just a couple of dipole antennas. Well, you'll get usually a whip on one end, and that'll be on your transmitter. Same exact antenna that you'd put on an HT. Literally the exact same antenna. In fact, for a long time, the UHF system that I had came with this crummy SMA antenna, and I put it on a antenna analyzer, and its SWR was just dumb. So so I bought a diamond SMA antenna, 2-meter 440. Yeah, it was just it was dual band, but didn't really matter. And I just screwed that thing onto my UHF transmitter, and it was solid. Never had a problem with it. And the farthest I ever flew, I was visiting some friends out in Phoenix, Arizona, and they went out to this shooting range out in the middle of nowhere. And they're like, "Yeah, you can fly out here." And I'm like, "Is anybody going to shoot my quad?" And they're like, "They better not, because that we'll make sure that." Anyway, I didn't have a problem, and I flew almost 2 miles out to this sort of rock pillar thing, and I circled around it a few times and then motored back, and that was really cool. They've changed the rules a little bit. It's harder to do that now legally, but back then it was still the Wild West, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk with Jason about how, if you so choose to, how you get started in this branch of the amateur radio hobby. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Are you tired of lousy propagation conditions and wondering how to work some real DX for a change? Maybe you spin the dial and wonder what's going on below the voice segment of the HF bands. The answer is, you're missing out. You're missing out on digital modes, a rapidly growing and exciting part of amateur radio. Work real DX with the incredible JT65 and JT9 modes. It's no exaggeration when I tell you, you will work stations you never thought possible, even using low power and compromised antennas. Have fun making new contacts in modes such as PSK31, Olivia, Radio Teletype, Slow Scan TV, and many more. The Rig Blaster Advantage is everything you need to operate these exciting digital modes. Made right here in the US, the Rig Blaster interface has set the standards for nearly 20 years. Thousands of satisfied operators have learned their Rig Blaster Advantage will provide solid digital communications, easy operating, and reliability. Don't miss out on the fun and excitement any longer. Head on over to everythinghamradio.com/WMR for more information and learn how to get your free USB port monitor with your purchase. Alright, and we are back with Jason Howard, Kilo 6 Delta George November, and we're talking about remote control devices, stuff like airplanes, drones, stuff like that. So, last segment, we talked about just kind of a general overview. Let's kind of talk about how somebody would get into this niche part of our hobby, and this is really kind of a hobby, marrying a hobby and mixing together, really, I think, and just a very small world, but I think, a lot, I'm sure probably in older times, so to speak, it was probably a little bit more useful to have your ham license than it is now. Like you said before, everything's in 2.4 gigahertz, so you don't have that much of a problem, but I wanted to learn about this, so we're talking about this. So what does somebody need, say somebody like me, what do they need to get started in RC stuff? If, say, like I wanted to do an airplane, or well, let's just do an airplane for now. What would I need to buy in order to get started?
So, okay, well, since we started with airplanes, I was going to mention that there are turnkey solutions. Actually, there's actually recently a airplane drone that I think Parrot released. But I'm mostly talking here about stuff you build. But there are turnkey solutions. So you can go out and buy like a DJI Phantom and fly it, and it's all Parts 95 compliant. And, it's a floating camera is really what it is. It's a very, very good floating camera. But, that's not what I'm after. I'm after putting something up in the air and flying like a bird. I know it sounds silly, but it's that childhood dream. You want to fly like a bird,
Well, yeah, and that's whole part of the ham radio experience, the whole DIY maker type thing.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
they just kind of mesh together, like I said,
Yeah, so I totally agree. And it's funny because every once in a while I'll be out at the airfield and somebody will pull up with a, mobile antenna on their roof. And You know, it's like there's definitely some crossover, and I've definitely spoken to some people on the repeater too that are also into airplanes and things like that, or used to fly at the very least. So to get into, say, an FPV airplane, which is, or again, first person view, you can, there are different places you can start. First thing you're going to want is you're going to want an airplane that is a pusher prop or a double prop plane. So it's got, you know, little engine pods out on the wings, and then it's got a nose that you can put a camera on, some kind of camera. Back in the day, there was an airplane called a Twin Star, and I think you can still buy it. I don't remember who makes it, and that was a really popular FPV plane. It was not made for FPV, but because it had the motor pods out on the wings instead of right there on the nose, like, you know, like a Cessna or something like that, you could put a camera there. The other more popular one nowadays is honestly what they call a pusher prop. By the way, for anybody who doesn't know, if the prop is on the front of the plane, pulling the plane along, they call it a tractor prop. But so a pusher prop is usually behind the wings, and it'll have like a low tail boom, and that'll push it along. If you do a search for something like the Hobby King Bixler, or there's 3 versions. The Bixler 3 is the current version. This is sort of that style of pusher prop plane. So you'll need a plane, obviously. You will need some radio gear. So generally speaking, you're going to start with some off-the-shelf stuff from, say, Spectrum, JR, Futaba. There are some new kids on the block like FR Sky. They make this really popular radio. It's all open source too. It's called Taranis. It is a Chinese-built radio. I believe it's a Chinese company. But a lot of people have really good things to say about these newer. It's kind of I almost don't want to say off-brand, because they're becoming an on-brand because they're so open source and things like that. But personally, I like Spectrum and Futaba. Those are kind of the two. And if you ever go out to a local field, you'll see most people generally have Spectrum radios, and that's because they offer really good value for money. You are going to need some batteries, obviously, if you're going to be flying an electric airplane. Heck, even if it's not electric, you're generally going to need batteries because you have a bunch of electronics to run. You're going to need a charger for your lithium polymer batteries. You are going to need a camera of some kind. You don't have to use goggles if you want to fly first-person view. You can get a little display and then put like a hood over it. Some people prefer to fly that way. I like to have goggles, but it's really hard for me to get motion sickness and stuff like that. I got a cast iron stomach, so most of the time, anyways. And of course, you're also going to need along with your radio gear, if you want to go into the UHF spectrum, so to speak. I actually said that on accident. I'm laughing at my own jokes. You're going to need some kind of UHF transmitter and receiver. But you don't have to start there. If we're just talking about kind of starting, you can just use your off-the-shelf Parts 95 gear. That's totally fine. And you just don't want to fly super far away. So those are like kind of the basic pieces that you really need. You control YouTube. Go through YouTube. There's lots of old and new videos about kind of what are good cameras, what are good video transmitters, things like that. There are video transmitters in lots of different spectrum, literally. There's like, let's see, 1.2 gigahertz, 1.3, 900 megahertz. There's even 2.4, which died out pretty quickly because a lot of people weren't using UHF to fly their planes. They were using 2.4 gigahertz. Again, Parts 95 off-the-shelf radio gear. So you don't want to have a 2.4 gigahertz transmitter on your airplane right next to a 2.4 gigahertz receiver.
Yeah, that might not be a good thing.
Yeah, unless you got some kind of really awesome notch filter or something like that. Even then, like, it's just silly. There's so many other bands you can use. And then, of course, currently 5.8 gigahertz is the sort of the most popular band. And that's good and bad. The good is that if you got some little tiny quadcopter that you're flying, the 5.8 gigahertz antenna is tiny. And what a lot of people use is a skew planar cloverleaf antenna. And that gets you a circular polarized signal. So that helps. And I know there's probably RF guys out there that know way more about this than probably both of us put together. But that helps eliminate multipathing. Whereas if you have a little dipole antenna, you're going to get multipath all over the place, especially if you got a lot of buildings around. But you honestly shouldn't be flying near buildings anyway. And if you got a little something teeny tiny, and you're buzzing it around inside your house, and yes, you can fly FPV in your house. But then that needs to go over to what we talk about with power levels and things like that, which is I tried to do some research on this and I couldn't really find a solid answer. And so there's probably people out there that are screaming at their phone or whatever they're listening to, their computer, saying, I know exactly what the answer to this is. But as far as I can tell, any power level above probably 10 milliwatts or 5 milliwatts or maybe even 1 milliwatt, you need a ham radio license. Even though it's in the 5.8 gigahertz spectrum, this hardware is not Parts 95 compliant. You are the licensee, not the hardware, right? It's kind of like a MERS radio has a license built onto it, whereas a ham radio, regular ham radio transceiver, you need to have the license. So this is the same idea. Most people generally won't fly with anything less than a 25 milliwatt transmitter, video transmitter. It is an analog signal, even though it's at 5.8 gigahertz. So what you do is you basically, it helps to already know how to fly an RC airplane. I always tell people that are going to get into the hobby, whether it be a quadcopter or an airplane, learn to fly the aircraft first. Get out to the field, get out to your club. If it's a little tiny park flyer or something like that, go to the park, fly it over some grass. If you plop it in the grass, it's generally going to be fine, especially with things like quadcopters or tiny helicopters, things like that. Plop it in the grass. And just get your skills up. Lots of practice, of course. Your radio gear is just going to be regular off-the-shelf stuff, and you put it all together. And the cool part too is that nowadays, back in the day, not so much, but nowadays, there are literally airplane platforms that are geared towards FPV flying. They're pretty big, usually 50, 60-inch wingspan. They're generally pusher prop planes. They got a huge equipment cavity inside of them, big wings, big lift. So, some of these planes weigh 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 pounds because you pack it full of batteries and you pack it full of, all your other radio gear that you need. And having an airplane is actually really great because you can take your radio receiver antenna and put it way out on one end of the wing, and then you can take your video transmitter antenna and put it way out on the other wing. So airplanes are great for that, and they cover a lot of distance too. I mean, you can fly an airplane for, with a lot of battery, and you can fly an electric airplane for 40, 50, 60 minutes.
Wow.
It depends on the mode, but you got to also think about, well, I'm getting really nerdy into RC here, but you got to start thinking about, okay, well, what prop do I want to use? Because you start getting into, like with electrics, you start getting into how many grams of thrust per watt. You know what I mean? And to me, though, that's no more nerdy than getting your SWR down as close to 1 as you possibly can so that you can transmit at 1 milliwatt and talk to Hawaii.
Right.
It's an efficiency game. So, but if you're carrying pounds of battery, even though your wing is your lifting instead of a deadlift with something like a helicopter or quadcopter, you eventually get to diminishing returns. But
let me ask a question here real fast.
Sure.
I noticed that you said to get started, you're talking about FPV type planes and stuff. Is that really the more of the norm now than just a regular, standing out in the field looking up at the sky, watching it fly back and forth in front of you?
I would say no. I think most people, there's the news sensationalizes it in my opinion, but I think most hobbyists that are flying airplanes, especially airplanes, are still flying LOS or line of sight. But and if you're not flying FPV, there's really no reason to get a UHF system, other than you're going to be on a completely different band than everybody else, and you're probably not going to have any interference. But even with the 2.4 gigahertz, you can have 40 people out at a field all running 2.4 gigahertz. And the planes the technology is good enough now that they can hop around on different frequencies, and you don't even notice. You might have 10 different frequencies that it can hop around on, and it'll do that 1,000 times while the plane's in the air, and you don't even notice.
Wow.
Because the time slicing is so tight. But yeah, so FPV and those frequencies and UHF for long-range flying pretty much go hand in hand. The downside about all this is it's a little Well, I'll just go to the document here, which I happen to have here. So the Academy of Model Aeronautics, which is sort of the ARRL of model aircraft, same idea. They are a lobbying body, and they also offer insurance at clubs and things like that. They have a document number 550. So if you go do a search for document number 550 on modelaircraft.org, or just do a web search, subparagraph K, FPV pilots can control flight paths of FPV and UAS, which is unmanned aerial systems, with a standard gimbal RC transmitter or a smartphone or tablet or smartwatch, which I thought that was funny that's in there, laptop or proprietary controller, with AP mission software, which I'm not sure what they mean by that, using RF telemetry modules for the control link. And that's totally not the paragraph that I was looking for. Here it is. Subparagraph F, as in Foxtrot. The AMA FPV spotter must... Nope, subparagraph E. Just go read the document in its entirety. It's only one page long. But basically what this says is you need to have a spotter that is staring at your aircraft. And to be legal, okay? We all want to be legal. So what they want you to do is they want you to have somebody next to you and who can take over who can basically take the transmitter from you and land the aircraft if the batteries fall out of your goggles, or if there's too much interference with your video link down to your screen or to your goggles or whatever you're using. They want you to have that for safety, basically. So flying long range where you can no longer see the aircraft is something the AMA does not sanction, which is a bummer because it didn't used to be that way. That said, I'm pretty sure a lot of people still do it. And there's also a huge community of people that fly little tiny RC racing drones through gates. They're usually not more than a few feet off the ground. They're not going to do anything other than maybe smash into a tree and break their gear. You know what I mean? So it's up to the user how they want to use their gear. So, but generally speaking, you're going to use UHF in conjunction with first-person view flying.
I remember seeing a video on Facebook. It's been probably about a year or so ago about one of those little mini racing drones, and they were racing around like a stadium or something like that, and they had it all set up like this obstacle course, and you had one camera looking at the first person view, one view looking at like them passing or something like that through this gate, and it was awesome. They were hauling, just going through up and down and around, and like, whew, how do you do that?
Oh yeah, practice. There's some simulators and stuff out there too, but yeah, I mean, even for that type of flying. So these little quads, they move so fast all the time that they basically have their cameras pointed up at a 45-degree angle, because in order for them to move forward, the quad needs to tilt forward and press the air away from it underneath it. So when these things are going at speed, they have to tilt their camera up 45 degrees so that when they're flying forward, it looks normal. Mm-hmm. It's just completely nuts. And I mean, some of these little tiny quads, they can do 40, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, in a straight line. It's a little missile. Wow. But yeah, so those are kind of the base. Sorry.
I'm sure it would probably hurt if they hit somebody.
Yeah. They're not going to kill you. They might. It's going to hurt. It'll bruise. But I wouldn't consider them. I mean, if it hit you in the head, yeah, you're gonna probably need to go to the hospital. But they're not gonna. These things weigh 200-300 grams. You'll get cut up pretty bad, but they're not gonna.
Yeah. I had a friend of mine that I work with. He's our IT guy, and he's big on drones. He's like our resident drone person, because we have a $20,000 drone at my work. I work for the sheriff's office. Nice. And I'm actually fixing to learn how to fly it and be one of the drone operators. But anyways, he has this little bitty one, and it's like the size of a Raspberry Pi or something like that. With four motors sticking out on it. And that thing will haul. I mean, like you said, it'll go 30, 40, 50 miles an hour or something like that. And he was flying back and forth, and with his goggles, flying back and forth in front of the sheriff's office. And me and the who's now the chief was standing outside watching him. And one of the investigators came walking out and didn't realize what we were doing. He looks over at us and goes to turn around, and it smacks him like dead center in the chest.
Oh.
It's like, oops.
Oops. Am I fired? That's tough. That's real tough. Yeah. And, and it's unfortunate too, because, that was an honest mistake. The guy, obviously he knew what he was doing. It was wrong place, wrong time kind of thing, right?
Oh yeah. We all had a good laugh at it.
Yeah, exactly. And thankfully it was something really tiny. You're not really putting anybody at risk. If it hit him on the head, though, he'd probably get a cut or something like that. Not from the blades, but from the actual body of the quadcopter hitting him. Because the blades are going to be, teeny little tiny things. But unfortunately, there's a lot of irresponsible people.
Right.
And where they think they can just go buy a DJI Phantom and they'll be like super pro. And that's just not the case. Even the Phantom, as easy it is to fly, along with most of the DJI's products, it's there's some discipline required. Same thing with ham radio. You could be real bad in ham radio.
Oh yeah.
Real bad. So yeah, exactly. But yeah, so those are the basics. That's a really long answer to kind of the real Spartan basics of what you need to get started. You need an aircraft of some kind. You need some off-the-shelf gear. You need batteries. You need a charger for your batteries. You need a camera. You need a video transmitter. A soldering iron would probably be a really good thing. Most hams I know own a soldering iron, myself included. Some kind of goggles or a video screen of some kind with a hood over it. And then, of course, UHF gear and stuff like that.
So where can you buy RC stuff? Where can you buy like the planes? Not so much the drones, because I know you can go on like Amazon and get the DG Phantom and stuff like that, but stuff like the planes or the cars or boats or whatever that somebody may want to do.
So, listeners, get your pens ready.
And we will have this link in the show notes too. So if you don't have a pen and you're driving down, please don't grab a pen.
Unless you're really good. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So I'm going to lay a bunch of websites on you here. Probably the best selection and really good customer service, because I used to buy a lot of stuff from these guys. I might be giving you the wrong. I think, did they change? No. Okay, they didn't change it. These guys are one of the earliest. They're called getfpv.com. And as in get as in receive. And getfpv.com is really great. They've got a ton of great products. By the way, I don't work for them. They don't sponsor me, anything like that. I'm a customer of theirs. I haven't bought anything from them in a while, but they've got good customer service and a massive, massive selection. They're in the 941 area code, so I'm not sure where that is in the country, but you could look that up to see kind of where they live. And again, they're at getfpv.com. And even if you just want a window shop, like what does this stuff even look like? What is a UHF transmitter that you Velcro to the back of a normal transmitter, RC transmitter, look like? And so you can go there and shop. What do FPV planes look like? They literally have a selection for FPV planes. Some people even FPV sailplanes. So you get on a nice hot summer day, you got the right gear, you get that thing 200-300 feet in the air, you're catching thermals, you're up there FPV flying like a bird for an hour. Wow. With hardly drawing any power. You got to move your servos and stuff, but so yeah, Get FPV is probably the first place I go. Ready Made RC is another good one. Ready Made, as in MADE, not made like clean your house, RC. And they're another great one. I'm not sure where they are in the country, but they're both here in the U.S. A-Main Hobbies. If you're into racing, you have your A-Main, which is that's your top tier finals race, right? So they call it A-Main Hobbies. These guys are a little more focused on the ground pounders, the cars and the RC trucks and things like that. But they do have some RC gear as well. Another really good one. They don't have a huge selection. But if you're especially looking to build like a quadcopter or something like that, or if nothing else, just kind of get a tap into the community a little more, flighttest.com. They've been around for quite a few years, and they just have an amazing community. The people, I think they're out in kind of near Ohio in that area. I don't think they're in Ohio. I can't remember, but they're over in closer to your neck of the woods there, Curtis. And they just have a great community, and it's a lot more limited selection. I'm kind of going from most selection to kind of least selection. But they're definitely one worth visiting for sure. But and then of course there's a Chinese website called hobbyking.com, and they've been around for a long time, and they've actually really managed to embrace the community pretty well, not just be, oh, well, we're just some Chinese company and we just want to shovel as much stuff over to America as we possibly can. I think maybe they started that way, but they've got a pretty good community around them now too, and they offer a real wide selection of different stuff. So they have some of the brand name stuff, and they have some of the off-brand stuff, and we'll probably end up talking a little more about that as well. But so yeah, those are kind of my go-tos. There are hundreds and hundreds of websites out there. Based off what we talked about, if you just do some searching online, you can probably find other stuff. But I think Get FPV and Ready Made RC are probably two of my absolute favorites. They really carefully curate their products and things like that too. And they both have really great websites and break everything down based on kind of what you're looking for. So like if you want to find a particular camera, they literally have a link at the top that says FPV equipment. This is for Get FPV. And then from there you can click on FPV cameras or antennas, right? So you can go to antennas and then you can say, okay, well, what band do I want to be on? Oh, I want to be on 2.4 or 1.3 or whatever. So those are some of my favorites.
Can you get all the ham gear and stuff from these websites too, or do you have to go to a special place to get those?
Get FPV in particular has all of the more of the ham band stuff, especially for the actual control of your aircraft. So that's the UHF system. They have all that.
Okay.
Sorry. So yeah, to more accurately answer your question, there are a few sort of major brands in UHF. There's Dragon Link, which is a guy out of Florida. It seems like half of them are a guy out of Florida. But I don't remember his name, but he started Dragon Link, and that's the system that I used to use. That's the system where I flew my quad 2 miles out to this, I was out in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and there's sort of this pile of rocks that was probably 50 feet high, maybe 80 feet high, something like that. And it was just naturally forming. It's been there for a bazillion years, and there it is, and now I'm flying around it. And so I used Dragon Link, and that worked out really well for me. Back then, TSLRS, Tango Sierra Lima Romeo Sierra, got to remember my phonetics, is another big brand. They used to be really expensive, and I think they've had to bring their prices down a little bit to compete. There's another company called Team Black Sheep, and back in the day, did some things that I wasn't really fond of, like flying across the Golden Gate Bridge with FPV, or flying around the Empire State Building, the Statue of Liberty, and things like that. They're based out of Europe, but they did this whirlwind world tour, and they brought all their gear, and they were flying their RC stuff, FPV, over people's heads, over major landmarks, things like that. They were eventually asked not to bring their stuff back to the U.S.
So Black Sheep was a good name for them.
But yeah, exactly. It actually was. And they actually make some pretty cool stuff even now. They were back then, and they still make some great stuff, and they actually make a UHF system now. And then probably the most popular, also an American company they're called Immersion RC, and they have a system called EZ UHF. And that's probably the most popular system that's out there. And I know back when I was doing UHF, I was like the one guy with the Dragon Link, and everybody else was running Immersion. And Immersion makes some pretty cool FPV quads and things like that too.
Cool.
And then as far as 5.8 gigahertz and stuff like that, those are not technically ham bands to my knowledge, but again, they are not. You basically need a ham license in order to operate this stuff legally because they are not Parts 95.
Okay. So one quick question here before we go to break. What would you say is the best way for a novice person just starting out to learn how to fly?
I would say, honestly, if you've got the funds, I would honestly start with a simulator. Simulators are kind of expensive, especially if you get one that comes with basically It'll come with like it looks like an RC transmitter. It's got the gimbals on it and all the little switches and stuff like that, but it does not have a transmitter. It has a USB port that comes out of the top of it. The one I like the most is called Real Flight. It's made by Great Plains, although I don't think they have the branding on it anymore. But if you just go to realflight.com, there's another one that I've been told has come a really long way, and it's probably a lot cheaper. It's called Phoenix RC, I believe, or just Phoenix Flight Simulator, something like that. You can look for that. That one supposedly has come a really long way, and it's actually a little better for people learning to fly quadcopters and helicopters and things like that. The next best way to do it, honestly, is to fly. With quadcopters, that's probably the easiest place to start because you can just hover it in place. And then, with an airplane, of course, it has to always be moving forward or it'll fall. So with an airplane, you need to kind of get a plane and probably basically go to a local club if you have a club in your area, and see if you can find somebody who's willing to train you on how to fly. Or if you have a buddy who's into it, say, hey, let's go out to the park. I've got a little park flyer that's got maybe like a 20-inch wingspan or maybe a little smaller, and you can chuck that thing in the air. And there's lots of different beginner planes and stuff like that. There's also lots of different planes that are even designed to fly themselves. You can get, I think it's the Flyzone Sensei FS, if I remember correctly. That's Foxtrot Sierra. Which actually stands for flight stabilization, but it's more than that. If that's the one I'm thinking it is, which I think it is, I don't have any notes on that right in front of me, but that one actually has a GPS receiver in it, and it can literally fly itself. And so if you can basically start it in super ultra beginner mode, and it's like having someone right there with you with a buddy box, which is basically a RC transmitter that's plugged into your transmitter. And I'm simplifying that setup, but the idea is that you flip a switch and boom, you have the person training you has control. But in this case, the airplane can literally fly itself. So you can set up a geofence, and if the plane gets a little too far away, it'll hit that geofence, and then it'll bank, and it'll come back around, and it'll fly in a circle around you until you take control again. Wow. It can even help you with landings or even land itself potentially. To get it to land itself is a little tricky. You got to make sure you have it set up right for it to do that. But pretty impressive. But again, those setups are expensive. Even the simulator, the real flight simulator, I want to say is over $100. But the simulators are great because the way they sell it, at least back in, what was it? I think 2010, because I learned how to fly with a straight up helicopter. I didn't even know simulators existed. I'm like, oh, well, this is how I have to learn how to learn how to fly. I have to fly and hopefully not crash this thing that I just spent weeks building. So, but the idea is that when you crash a digital airplane, the money that would have costed you to repair, you've saved, right?
Right.
So if you had crashed the real thing, oh, well, you've lost that money, but you crashed the digital version, and you've saved that money. So there is no substitute for real life. There really isn't. But a simulator is a really great way to kind of get your thumbs worked up and kind of train your brain on how to fly, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think my luck would be I'd take it out, I'd take off or throw it or whatever, and make the first turn and crash it into a tree or something.
Yeah, well, especially back in the day, when you were building plywood airplanes and things like that, it takes you 6 months to build and 1 second to destroy it.
Yeah.
Right?
So I'd much rather spend the $150 on the simulator than the $300 or $500 to replace the airplane multiple times so I keep crashing.
Oh yeah, the simulator pays for itself the first time you use it. It really does. There's even in Real Flight, I don't know if it's still there, there's a little Easter egg. If anybody out there flies and has Real Flight, you can try this if you didn't know it existed. You go into Real Flight, I believe you hit the tilde key, which is usually just to the left of your 1 key on your keyboard, and that'll bring down a little terminal, and you can type the words, all one word if I remember correctly, this has been years, show me the money. You type show me the money, hit enter, and I think it makes a cha-ching sound or something, I can't remember. Again, it's been a while. Hit the tilde key again, the little console will slide up and out of the way, and the next time you crash your aircraft, little dollar signs will come off of your aircraft as parts are breaking and flying off of it, and then when you're done, it'll actually show you a little summary and show you in estimated dollars how much money you've saved by crashing a digital airplane versus the real thing.
Wow.
But which is hilarious, but again, there's no true substitute for real life. Like just today, I'm getting back into the hobby, and I've had to kind of not only relearn, but kind of prove to myself that I can fly. And it was windy. It was probably 10, 15 mile an hour breeze. And, the airplane's going to bobble around and jiggle, and the wind's going to knock it around. And sometimes there's a cross breeze, and you have to add a little bit of rudder or something like that. And again, I'm just getting into the hobby. So right now, all I'm doing is just normal off-the-shelf Parts 95 gear. But I'm following my own advice, right? I'm relearning how to fly RC aircraft, and then I'll be dabbling with the FPV and things like that a little bit later.
All right, so let's go ahead and take another break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk with Jason about some of the stuff that he has, and we're going to talk a little bit about drones. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Hi, this is Dan, KB6NU, author of the No Nonsense Amateur Radio License Study Guides. My study guides have helped thousands get their license or upgrade to general class or extra class, and they can help you too. What makes them unique is my no-nonsense style. I don't bamboozle you with a lot of text. Instead, I give you just what you need to know in a simple, straightforward way that's designed to help you pass the test. One reader even told me, your study guide explained in a couple of paragraphs topics that the license manual needed a couple of pages to cover. Another wrote, the clarity and simplicity of your descriptions blew the license manual away. My study guides are available in paperback, in a variety of ebook formats, and even as audiobooks. Get your copy today. Go to kb6nu.com/ETHR for more info. Thanks.
All right, y'all, we are back again with Jason Howard, K6DGN. This segment, we're going to talk about what kind of things that Jason has, and we're going to get a little bit into the drone side of things a little bit more. So first off, Jason, what kind of RC things do you have? Do you own?
Ooh, this is a great question. So right now, I won't talk about the stuff I've had in the past. I'll just talk about what I currently have. And so hams have a shack. RC nerds have a hangar. So in my hangar, I have an airplane from Hobby King called a Wingnetic. It is, if you look it up, you can see what it looks like. But it's basically a flying wing with a sort of partial fuselage to it in the middle, and it has a folding prop up front. And this little thing is fast. It's a blast to fly. Sitting right underneath it, I'm looking at it, I have another Hobby King flying wing called a ETH070, and it's a little bit bigger. I forget the exact size. I think it's 800 millimeters. Everything's metric. Hams are going to love it. Everything's metric in RC. Everything. So I have a ETH070, and that thing, I've had it for probably 3 or 4 years. It's had the same speed controller and motor. The speed controller provides power to the motor. It also provides power to your RC gear, like your servos and your receiver and things like that. It's been untouched, basically, for over 4 years now. And that thing probably has 3-4 hours of flight time on it, which may not sound like a lot, but a flight's all of about 6 to 8 minutes. So that thing has been in the air more times than probably all my other aircraft combined in the entire history of me flying. You can throw it in the back, take it out to the beach, take it wherever, and just go fly it. It's great.
And it only has 6 hours on it?
Yeah, I guess.
Wow.
So. But
I would have think you had like 60 hours or something like that flight time. That's your most used one.
Yeah. I mean, I spread it all around, so or maybe I'm exaggerating. But it's a great little thing, and some people hate wings. I think they're great because they're just so simple. You know, it's a motor and well, in some cases it's a motor and 1 servo, but usually it's a motor and 2 servos and a receiver and a battery and a speed controller and a wing, and that's it. So anyway, I have that. I have a tricopter, which is in pieces on my workbench right now because I am rebuilding it. I'm doing some upgrades to it. The tricopter is pretty special. It's one of my favorite builds. I've probably built, I'd say at least a dozen multi-rotor aircraft. So that's, a quadcopter. Tricopter is 3 blades instead of 4. Oh boy, it's a whole nother subject to go into how a tricopter flies versus how a quadcopter flies. That's like a whole nother podcast. But basically, it tilts the rear motor. It tilts it back and forth, and then that provides yaw, which is moving left and right, not sliding left and right, but sort of looking left and right. So I have that. It's in pieces. I need to do some desoldering and then resoldering on that kit. I've got an old DJI Flame Wheel 450, which is back before DJI was making the Phantom and the Inspire and the Zenmoose, however you pronounce it, and probably the thing that you have at the police station, which is this big heavy lifter with all kinds of fun stuff on it. Before they were making that, they were making little crummy frames and flight controllers just like everybody else. And honestly, it's not crummy. The Flamewheel 450 was sort of the bog standard of frames for quite a while. Quick sidebar: a quadcopter is a sum of its parts. You buy a frame, you buy motors, you get speed controllers to run the motors. You need a flight controller of some kind. But as opposed to an airplane, which is just servos and a motor and things like that. So. Let's see, what else do I have? A few weeks ago, I bought a used Fly Zone Sensei. And thankfully, they still make the Sensei parts because they have a new version of it called the Sensei FS, which is what I talked about earlier. I wrote Hobby Co., which owns Fly Zone, and I said, hey, are these the same? It looks the same. And they responded a couple days later, yep, it's all the same. So the plane's super old. It's probably 5 or 6 years old, and it looks it. If an airplane could have gray hair, this thing would have it. So, but I finally got it up in the air today properly and paid $45 for it. And I just needed batteries, basically. I actually ended up needing to do a bunch of stuff to it, but that thing got a new motor and a bunch of stuff because the motor in it was pretty shot. And then I also got that same day for $60. Really happy about that. I got a FMS, that's Foxtrot Mike Sierra, Sky Trainer 400. It looks just like a Cirrus SR22. My guess is they stopped selling it. This is only a guess because they actually did not license the fuselage or the airframe or whatever you want to call it from Cirrus. So, but I managed to find some spare parts for that. I paid $60 for that. And got that bad boy up in the air today as well. And the person that built that thing did a really great job. They clear coated all the foam. It's real slippery, but not in a bad way. It's not like a bar of soap. It's we're just real smooth. And so I've got that, and that thing's been a great flyer. I haven't had to do a whole lot to it. I did plop it real hard on the front nose wheel a couple of weeks ago, last time I had a chance to fly. So stripped the servo, and I had to replace that. And I had to replace the nose gear and all that stuff. So, that's sort of the main aircraft that I have. I've also got a Futaba T8J radio. That's my main radio. And then I'm moving away from Spectrum, mainly because I like the Futaba S-Bus. If you go look up S-Bus, you'll see what it is. Again, that's a whole nother... We could have a whole nother podcast on like RC Parts 95 technology, quad frames, how a quad actually works versus like a tricopter or a hexacopter or all that stuff. For FPV gear, I have a Quantum. Oh shoot, what's this thing called? Let's see here. I have the Quantum DIY FPV goggles. And those are a great goggle. They cost $31. And it's basically an LCD screen and like these foam bits and like this neoprene, like the stuff they make like a wetsuit out of. And it's this thing, and it comes in pieces, and you put it together yourself. And so it costs $32. Along with that, you need a video receiver, which I think this is kind of going back to earlier in the show. But I have a little Quantum mini receiver that actually slides right onto the setup. And again, that's the Quantum DIY FPV goggle V2 Pro, and you can find that over at hobbyking.com. It's been a great little cheapo setup. There's another company called Fat Shark. They're probably the most popular, and they're much smaller. These DIY goggles look like you're wearing a toaster on your face. So just imagine that, right? So But that's what I'm doing for FPV. The only FPV gear aircraft that I have is my tricopter, which is in pieces right now. So, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And then I got a smattering of tools and some batteries and the soldering iron. I got this old Radio Shack soldering iron that takes Hako tips. I love the thing.
So
got it back in 09.
So being a ham and
Yes.
doing RC type stuff, you actually have a shack hanger, not just a hanger.
I have a shanger. Yes. I fly my radios and I talk on my aircraft.
There you go.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about drones. We've
Sure.
talked quite a bit about them already, but let's talk about them specifically. How are they different when it comes to flying drones versus regular helicopters or planes?
Sure. So I will talk about, because helicopters have actually changed quite a bit since back in 2009. Back in 2009, all the heads were mechanically mixed, and you had these paddles with little weights on them. If you're a beginner, you put these weights on them, and it helps make the disc of the helicopter kind of more stable. Basically, it makes the aircraft a little more stable. Or should I say slightly less unstable? It's probably a better way to put it. I guess the primary difference between something like a helicopter and a quadcopter, and I also want to talk about, in my opinion anyway, what the difference is between a quadcopter or a tricopter or a multi-rotor versus a drone. Because to me, they're different things. And since I'm on a podcast and there's some people listening, I want to talk about that just very, very briefly. Spread the love a little bit here, at least. And again, this is just my opinion. Some people may disagree with me. But anyway, the main difference between, say, a collective pitch helicopter and something like a quadcopter is a collective pitch helicopter. The reason why they call it collective pitch is because as the helicopter is flying, typically you fly in what's called idle up mode. And basically, not 100%, but basically you're flying at nearly 100% throttle all the time. Which sounds like it's really hard on the aircraft, and it kind of is. Maintenance is a thing. You need to, keep a close eye on things, but you basically fly at nearly 100% throttle, and then when you want the helicopter to go up, when you push up on your when you push up on your throttle, the helicopter will go up because it is introducing more pitch to the rotor blades as they're spinning. With a quadcopter, there are exceptions to this rule, but with a multi-rotor type of an aircraft, you usually, it's like, say with a quadcopter, for example, you're flying 4 fixed pitch props. And as a result of that, you will lose control authority at lower RPMs. And so to fly down, let's say you're on a windy day, the wind is blowing over your props, that's actually going to create a little more lift. So you need to ease down on the throttle a little bit. But when you do that, your props are spinning more slowly, and you don't get quite as much control authority. Whereas with a helicopter, it doesn't care. It's always at 95 to 100% throttle all the time. So no matter how hard it blows, you can just ease back on the pitch of the props, and you still have all the control authority you want. So it's pretty interesting. It would be really hard to describe how a quadcopter flies on an audio podcast. But just very briefly, basically what a quadcopter does is the front right and rear left props spin in the same direction, and then the the opposite props spin in the opposite direction. So let me get this right. The front right, rear left spin in the same direction. The front left, rear right spin in the opposite direction, but the same direction. So so imagine the two front props are spinning. Typically, they'll spin towards each other. So the right one will spin counterclockwise, and the left one will spin clockwise. And in order to yaw, which again is to basically make imagine looking to the right or to the left with your head. That's a yaw for an aircraft. So in order to yaw, what you actually do is these motors are basically constantly providing some sort of amount of spin and torque. So what you do is if you want to yaw in one direction, you can spin down, and the flight controller does this for you, of course, but you spin down the two props that are spinning in the same direction. So in this case, let's pretend it's the front left and the rear right. Oh, but now you're going to lose lift. So you need to spin up the other two props that are spinning in the other direction, and the copter, as we can say for short, that's a sort of a German thing, but it's spelled with a K too, which is super cool. I love it. I don't know. I'm a Europe nerd too, so anyway, I'm from the States, but I like Europe. That will actually cause the aircraft to yaw because there is more rotational force going one direction than the other direction. And so if you want the aircraft to then roll, you just apply power to the two left motors and it will roll right, or vice versa. Or if you want it to tilt forward, you apply a little more power to your rear motors and it will tilt forward. And then of course, the flight controller takes care of all this and it combines all of these things for you so that when you move the sticks, it's basically fly-by-wire. So when you move the gimbals on your transmitter, on your RC transmitter, you're basically asking the flight controller, hey, can you please move the aircraft, this way, or pitch it that way, or roll it this way, or yaw it that way? And it takes care of all of the various fine-tuning little throttles that need to happen on your electric motors. So that's honestly the main difference. The big benefit, though, of something like a quadcopter or even a tricopter, or more, if you want to go hexacopter or even more than that, although I've never seen anything bigger than a hexacopter. Octocopter. That's 8 motors. They are just kind of inherently stable. There are new modern helicopters that can actually auto level and even auto hover on GPS. That's pretty new, cutting edge stuff. But back in the day, it used to be you really wanted a quadcopter, and then you could get something like a GPS receiver, and then it will connect to the flight controller, and there's software that runs, and it'll fly itself. It'll sit there and it'll hover there for you. And but at the very minimum, if you wanted to build something like super minimum, there are lots of basic flight controllers out there. There's the NAZE 32 and AZE32, and then those actually run like 3 different open source softwares now. There's OpenPilot, OpenAero. Those are the only 2 I can think of off the top of my head. But so back in the day, I would use this little cheapo, like $15, $20 flight controller called a KK2 board. The original design, actually I have one right here. The original design was by a guy named Rolf R. Bach, B-A-K-K-E. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but I'm going to pretend that it's Bach. And Hobby King made that and actually licensed the technology from him. And it's a great little board because it's got a little tiny display on it, which that's super rare even today. And all that thing did was do all the fly-by-wire stuff that I just discussed, and if you had it enabled, it would auto-level the craft for you. And that's it. So it would sit in auto-level, and it would stay nice and even, whereas with an old helicopter like what I was flying with the paddles and everything, if you took your hands off the stick, it would just roll off to the side and smash into the ground. So, but there are nice, like, high-end helicopters now. The other real major thing that you get, I just whacked my mic. The other real major thing that you get here is, with a quadcopter, is you get a lot more stable sort of lifting ability. There were some really cool lifting helicopters back in the day that would carry like a digital SLR and it had these crazy giant rails and it was like gas powered and super nuts. And then like quadcopters came out and and drones and things like that later on. So that was a really long answer.
It's okay. It's okay.
Really super thorough.
Yeah. Well, the drone that we have at my work, it's like I said, it's like $25,000.
Yeah.
And it has all the little bells and whistles. It has the FLIR camera. It has the connects to an iPad and has the GPS and all that good stuff. And the neat thing about it, and I'm sure it goes along with a lot of the higher dollar drones, is that you can actually look at like a Google Maps type thing and lay out like a search pattern, touch the different points or something like that and make like a flight plan. And it will go and basically fly itself in this flight plan.
Yes.
And do everything for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, and for somebody that's into search and rescue and stuff like that, I mean, it sounds to me like one of the main guys that you have flying that particular device, it's a hobby too, and which is great. But they want to set these up so that anybody can grab this thing and go fly it. And that actually brings me over to what I wanted to say about the difference between quadcopters and drones. A basic quadcopter has something like a NAZE 32 or the KK2 board in it or something like that. You get auto level, and that's it. You're happy. That's all you get. Enjoy it. That's for you, right? And it cannot fly itself. It can keep itself level, but if the wind blows on it, it's just gonna off it goes. So it's still up to you to maneuver it around. A drone, and again, this is just my opinion. It's a fairly popular opinion, but not everybody is this way. To me, a drone is something that can fly itself. So like the Flamewheel 450 I have, the flight controller on that is called a NASA M Lite, and M is in Mike. And the NASA M Lite has three neat functions. It has auto level, like the basic boards do. It has a GPS mode. So basically, if you are flying around and you get discombobulated or whatever, or you just want it to hover there and look at something, you just take your hands off the stick. It's got a GPS antenna and it stops. That's, to me, that alone right there, where it can be sitting in the wind and it'll try and keep itself pretty much where it wants to be based on the accuracy of GPS. That is autonomous flight. And then, of course, it actually also has an auto return to home, which is literally autonomous flight, where it will motor back from wherever you have it. So let's say you get it really far away and you can't see it. You just flip into failsafe. You can even turn your transmitter off. And but I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you've thoroughly tested failsafe first. But you basically put it in failsafe either with the flip of a switch or turn your transmitter off. It'll stop what it's doing, raise up to, I want to say 60 feet, which is above the height of most trees and things like that. And it will motor itself back and it will try and land roughly where it took off from. So to me, that's basic autonomous flight.
Right.
And so the Flamewheel 450 is a drone. But like my tricopter it's not a drone to me because it does not have any kind of autonomous flight. It auto levels, done. So,
of course, nowadays you see these videos and stuff on iTube on these little selfie drones, and it's all controlled by your phone. And it'll follow you wherever you walk, and how if you run or stop or change directions or whatever, it'll stay the camera centered on you, and it basically flies itself.
Yep, and it's funny because I sigh when you said that, but at the same time, it's pretty cool.
Yeah,
that we have this technology now where because remember that you had the sci-fi movies not even that long ago where you might have some little camera drone following around like a news anchor, and it would just hover there with powered on hand wavium or whatever whatever the mystery fuel was where it can hover forever. But we kind of have that now. We have this little thing that you can take out of your pocket and it'll follow you around.
Yeah, and it's literally the size of your pocket.
Yeah, absolutely.
I still want one.
And you know what? I think I kind of do too. Even though I like to build them, I kind of do too. But they're expensive and stuff like that. But I think we'll continue to see this technology get better and better and better. And we have to see about how organizations like the AMA and the FAA and things like that come along. Oh, I wanted to mention, because I forgot to mention this earlier when you were talking about getting started. It used to be that you had to register as a pilot, as a hobbyist, with the FAA, which even back when they laid this law down, people were like, that's not legal. But so there was actually a lawsuit that happened. Let me see if I can find the tab that I had this on. So there's an article on recode.net, which is sort of a tech blog. And if anyone would like to read it, get your pens out, unless you're driving, where it is. I have a tiny URL for this, and I'll give that in a moment. So they talk about actually just a few days ago, so I'm glad we actually had to wait as long as we did to do this. But on May 19th, the rule that non-commercial, well, they use the word drones, but this applies to all what the FAA calls UAS, or unmanned aerial systems. That includes regular plain old boring hobbyists. That was the big thing about airplanes, is and just like ham radio, you might have a father and son, or a father and daughter, or sometimes a mother, but usually it's a dad and a kid. But where they would get into ham radio together, and RC is the same way. It's absolutely the same way, where you'll have father and son, grandfather and son, or daughter, whatever. They get together and they go out and they fly together, and they are flying a trainer or something like that. and it's this great bonding experience, and they get to do something. Maybe they got to build it, even if it's a foam airplane. You still got to install electronics potentially and put it all together yourself. And they were lumping everyone into this, where any kind of radio-controlled aircraft was a UAS. I'm making air quotes right now, literally. I'm not joking. It was a UAS. And that was actually illegal because there was the FAA Modernization and Reform Act passed by Congress in 2012 prohibited the FAA from passing any rules on the operation of model aircraft. So there was a hobbyist named John Taylor who brought this case against the FAA in January of last year, and he won. Yay! So I don't need to put my FAA registration number on my airplanes anymore. This is kind of bittersweet, though, because believe it or not, a lot of drone pilots were actually pretty happy about this because it required some kind of accountability, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you were required to put this number on, it's not a big number. It's like 12 characters, letters and numbers, something like that. And you were required to put that on your aircraft so that if you smashed it into a building or smashed it into a park full of kids or on the White House lawn.
No, nobody would do that.
Nobody would do that. Nobody would ever do that, especially local security that worked for the White House. Never happened. Totally happened. Anyway, yeah, said no one ever, right?
Right.
But anyway, so I have if anybody would like to read this. Earlier I was going to say, and you need to register with the FAA, but you don't need to do that anymore, not for non-commercial use. And it doesn't matter if it's a multi-rotor, a drone, an airplane, a flying lunchbox, whatever you put a prop on to put in the air, you don't need to put an FAA number on it anymore. And the tiny URL, because it's kind of a long URL, is tinyurl.com. See if I can get my phonetics right. Lima, Yankee, Kilo, Kilo, November, Bravo, Victor. So tiny URL, Lima, Yankee, Kilo, Kilo, November, Bravo, Victor. And that will take you to the Recode article, and you can read about this. So if you're already a pilot and you haven't heard about this yet, you can go look this up. Peel that sticker off your airplane with gusto, or leave it there. I'm just going to leave mine there.
They're already there. You might as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's not any worse than taking the tag off your mattress, I promise. So anyway, sorry for the sidetrack, but I wanted to mention that earlier, and I just totally forgot. What were we talking about originally? The difference between drones and helicopters.
Right.
Please leave this in. Please leave this in. So those are kind of the main differences. And so now you have a basic idea of how multi-rotors work versus helicopters.
Okay. So one last quick question here. And by quick, I'm, if you talk 10 minutes, that's fine. But
okay.
What are some kind of uses that you see or that you have maybe participated in with drones in the communications or emergency communications area, like search and rescue or something like that?
Well, the short answer is none. But we had some really cool ideas. Do you remember? Actually, no, I won't go over that because we're way over. But one idea that we had was on like field day, get a really long wire antenna or even a dipole, and put it on a string to separate the aircraft from the end of the antenna where high voltage can live potentially, and get that thing way up in the air, like 100 feet in the air, and do some quick QSOs on it if you could. That was one idea we had, which we never did. I was a little worried about 100 watts coming off the end of that thing and just frying my quad, right?
Yeah.
And we never tried it, and who knows? I've flown fairly close to cell towers and things like that accidentally, and nothing bad happened. Actually, it wasn't a cell tower, but it was a radio tower, and nothing bad happened. So who knows for sure? The other more idea that made sense and was a little less nuts was actually I wanted to take that same quad that I had, and I wanted to put a little servo on the underside with a little hook. And the idea was that I could take some fishing weights on some fishing line and you got to wait in a few different places so that the spool of air that's washing underneath the aircraft doesn't cause the line to scoop back around and then catch in the prop, and then it's just going to drop like a rock. So we never did this, but it was the idea that on field day, again, we would basically take a string way up over a tree and fly over to the other side and then drop it. And you could do that even via FPV. At one time I had a setup where I had a down-facing camera and a forward-facing camera, and I actually had this little video switch that I bought from getfpv.com, and the video switch would plug into one of the channels on my receiver, and I could flip a switch on my radio, and I could change video feeds. I could look down or I could look forward. And it was a really cool setup. I don't remember why I think I took it apart at one point, but the idea was that I could look down at the tree, and I could kind of see literally where I was, and I could drop the weights down the other side, and then somebody down on the ground could grab the weights, and they would pull the string, and you would pull your feed line, or not your feed line, your antenna. You'd have like a big sloper or something off of a tree, and you could pull it that way, and then have your sloper, 60 feet in the air on top of this giant tree. But again, we never did that either.
It's totally doable, totally understandable. Yeah. We had in the county that I live in, one of our volunteer firefighters has a drone, and he's actually a beta tester maybe for what is it? The Phantom one. I think it's the Phantom one. Anyways,
there's a bunch of Phantoms.
Yeah, it is one of the high end drone manufacturers. He's a beta tester for it, and he gets all the new awesome gear and stuff like that he tries out and looks out for all the bugs and stuff. But anyways, last year we had some really bad flooding here with some major rain that we had, like 24 inches or something like that, in like a 36-hour time frame. And this actually made the national news. This did. A couple was in a trailer, and it got flooded all around them. And there was 100 feet or so of water all the way around them to the closest dry spot. And it was all Russian water. And my county doesn't have a hovercraft like the one that I work in now does. So they took a drone and attached a rope to the bottom of it and flew the rope over to the people, got it where they got the rope, let go of it, and then the couple was able to pull the rescue line and the life vest over to it. So I'm totally doable. Totally doable. So I'll try and see if I can find the video. It's online on his Facebook page. I'll see if I can find the video and email it to you after we get done here. Maybe tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. So, maybe throw it in the show notes too.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely, definitely.
Here I am. I'm now directing. Yes, it's true.
So I mean, in all honesty, I think drones are very awesome and very, very. What's the word I'm looking for? Versatile in all different types of things. Like you said, you can do it for emergency communications, like field day and stuff, putting up antennas. Search and rescue we use for a lot. We've done we've looked for people. We have a 10 miles of riverfront. The Brazos River runs right through our county, and our county is only about 8 miles from north to south, and there's 20 miles of river in our little county, and because it goes back and forth and back and forth. Well, it's downstream from two major lakes. And when we had all that rain, it went from being down 20 feet to being over 15 feet on both the lakes. So they were dumping out water just galore, and it just flooded the river downstream. And we had several times where there was, people that were, being not too smart and tried to tube down the river and got caught or whatever. And thank God we had the hovercraft to do it. But, we use the drone to basically go out and find them. And, there's so much uses for it. And not just amateur radio, but definitely in emergency communications as well. So I am all for it. And I cannot wait to start training on the drone that we have at work. But it sounds really fun. Before we go, we've talked a lot about drones and we've talked a lot about RC stuff. but we haven't really talked a whole lot about ham stuff. So what kind of ham stuff do you have?
I will try and be quick because I know we're way over. But I have let's see, what do I have? I really like Yaesu radios because that's just kind of what I started with. So I have a Yaesu FT991, shack in a box, so to speak. I have a Yaesu FT2D HT. I've got a gaggle of Chinese radios because they're fun, to mess with, and they're cheap, and you can hand them to a friend who's licensed and be like, here, use this. If you drop it in the dirt, I don't care. I have a ICOM ID51A. I have in my car, I have a FTM100DR System Fusion radio as well, and I've got an old Kenwood 2-meter. I forget what the model is. TK2A, TK2, something like that. Yeah, it's like early 2000s, I think. But it's a cool little radio. It's 2-meter only, super easy to program, but the batteries under a shot. And yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah, and before that, I had an FT1D. I had a Kenwood TMV71A mobile that I used at home. I actually used it in a car for a while.
Love that radio.
Yeah, great radio. Again, Kenwood I think they use their radios.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like, oh, hey, let's make a radio that's like really easy to use. And I love Kenwood, at least the 2-meter 440 radios. I find them just really easy to use. I don't have a whole lot of experience with their HF radios, but I do like their they're those. Yeah, those radios there.
I have two actually TM733s that I bought used 20 years ago, and both of them are still just chugging along. One of them is mounted in my car. One of them is currently in a box because I don't have my ham shack here up yet. I have an ICOM T7 or an IC730 HF radio that I have here waiting to be hooked up to an antenna. So yeah, I absolutely love Kenwood. I've had an ICOM handheld. I didn't really like it all that much. I actually had two of them, a IC32, I think, and an IC33, something like that.
Did you have an IC92? Was it the 92?
No, I don't think so.
I'm super dumb, and I could not figure that radio out. I had an IC92, and I just couldn't figure it out. And there's probably somebody out there going, but that radio's awesome, and it's super easy. Right. No, I'm just dumb.
But yeah, ever since then, I've gotten nothing but Kenwoods, with the exception of my HF radio that my dad bought me for Christmas at a estate sale, a ham estate sale. But yeah, I just love Kenwood. I wish they would have a System Fusion radio, because every repeater within about, I don't know, 100 miles or so of me is now System Fusion.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Everybody used to be analog, and now every one of them is System Fusion. When they did the special for the repeaters where the club could buy them for $500.
Oh yeah,
everybody
absolutely.
went and got one. So I mean, there's 6 repeaters in my county, and every one of them are System Fusion, and every one of them except for one has a Wires X on it. So I wish I had a System Fusion one. A couple of friends have the System Fusion one, and they sound awesome, but I love Kenwood too much.
Yeah, I hear you. I do hear you. It's too bad what is that new one? The THD74A with D-Star?
Something like that, yeah, it has a D-Star.
Man, if they had squeezed System Fusion in there, they should have just called it the THD kitchen sink.
Exactly.
Because that thing does, I think it does AM, aircraft band receive. It does 2-meter, 220, 430. It ties your shoes. It makes you dinner. Okay, I don't think it says that on the website, but it's pretty cool.
Oh goodness. Well, Jason, I thank you so very much for coming on today. I have learned so much from you. A lot of answered questions that I've had for I don't know how long. And George, if you're listening, thank you for hooking us up, and I will talk at you next time. I'll get a hold of you with that video after we get done. And everybody, there will be all the links that he said today. I think I have all of them except for one. But I will have them in the show notes, because if you're listening and you're driving, I don't want you writing down or anything like that. So I will have them in the show notes, so please check those out. You can find those at everythinghamradio.com/podcast / I want to say it's 70. I will have the correct link in the intro of this video, but I believe it's 70. So, like I said, Jason, thank you very much for coming on, and I greatly appreciate it. Had a great time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you as well, and you're very welcome. I've just had a blast. Sorry for going a little long, but
not a problem.
Just it's funny. I started nervous, and then I'm like, man, this Curtis guy's super nice. So just went right into comfort zone. So I feel like we've been friends for years.
Absolutely. Well, 73 to you, sir, and you have a wonderful evening.
All right, thank you very much. I'll talk to you again soon.
See you.
Bye-bye.
All right, so that was Jason, and like I said, we had an awesome conversation about remote-controlled devices, and I hope that you really enjoyed it as much as I did. I've gone a little over what I typically do, so I've decided to forego the events, the contest, and upcoming Hamfest. I might just cut it out altogether. I'm not really quite sure. It's kind of a pain to say sometimes, and honestly a little boring as well. So I think I'm going to forego them, at least on this episode. I do have the ham blog spotlight that I'm going to do, and that is my good buddies over at Ham Radio 360. As you know, last weekend was Hamvention 2017 at the new Xena Arena. Well, as they did last year, they made individual podcast episodes for every day that they're there, and they interviewed a whole bunch of people and threw this all together and uploaded it that day after they were all done. I'm sure they probably stayed up until like midnight or better again. So make sure you head on over to hamradio360.com and check those out. Also, if you didn't watch it, W5KUB.com had live streaming all weekend long. He gave away a whole bunch of prizes and stuff. So make sure you check that out as well. And you can find, I believe you can find the rebroadcast on his YouTube channel. But you can also listen every Tuesday to his live broadcast, which is the Amateur Radio Roundtable. You can find that at W5KUB.com and then click on live broadcast up at the top. And it's on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. I believe 8 p.m. Central, if I'm not mistaken, but you can check that out and get further information in the show notes. He has a text chat as well for all the listeners. Typically, his thing goes for about an hour or so, and then after that, he has like an open forum where you can actually jump on there and just kind of have like a rag chew session or so afterwards, and it's all broadcast. And he actually broadcasts his the Amateur Radio Roundtable over shortwave as well. And I don't remember the frequency on that, but they actually do rebroadcast that as it's going live over shortwave. So that's pretty cool. Tom is an awesome guy. He's probably has one of the biggest, definitely one of the biggest amateur radio shows, I guess you could say. He's right up there with Ham Nation and then definitely a very close third is probably Ham Radio 360. They have just exploded since last year at Hamvention. I'm sure they will explode again this year. But that is the blog spotlight, so definitely check those two websites out as well. Both of them are awesome, great guys, and great shows, so make sure you check that out. Again, hamradio360.com and w5kub.com. That pretty much wraps it up, I think. Like I said, I'm not going to have the event or the Hamfest, even though I already have them on the show notes. I'll go ahead and leave those on there since I already did them. I don't... Actually, yeah, I guess I do have them all. Well, I just have this next week on the show notes. So I will go ahead and leave those up on the show notes if you want to see them. Just head on over to the website the show notes website. Again, that's everythinghamradio.com/podcast/70. I want to thank you for listening today with this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did. I know I had a great conversation with Jason. And George, if you are listening, thank you very much for hooking us up. I learned a whole lot about it. If you have not done so already, please subscribe to my email list. You can find that at everythinghamradio.com/subscribe, or you can go to the show notes at the very bottom. There's a form you can fill out there. Either way, once you fill out the information, click on the Sign Me Up button. You'll get an email from me with a link that you'll need to click on before you start receiving emails from me. And basically, all it does is announce when a new podcast episode goes live, and on the rare occasion that I put a blog post or something up as well. If you like what you heard here and you want to help support this podcast, keep the lights on, you keep the website up, and the media host and all that good stuff, you can do that several ways. And you can find all information on that on the support page at everythinghamradio.com/support. You can make a one-time donation through PayPal. You can become a per episode contributor through Patreon. And also simply shop on Amazon.com through my affiliate link, which you can find in the sidebar of the website. Once again, I want to thank my sponsors, West Mountain Radio, westmountainradio.com /WTH070 or 17, I believe is what the code is here. Let me look real fast here on the fly here. How about that? Actually, don't see it. But if you go to everythinghamradio.com /WMR, you will find that for sure. And you get a free USB port monitor with any purchase as well if you use that code. Also, check out Randy over at KB3IHF QSL cards if you need some new QSL cards or some new swag stuff for your station. You can order those from him. If you mention that you heard about him on my podcast, I will get a small affiliate commission as well. Also, check out my swag store. I have some coffee cups, mouse pad, some coasters, and I'm adding stuff all the time. Well, not all the time, but I will be adding stuff in the future. Some shirts and hats as soon as I can find somebody that will do it for me, as well as some custom name or call sign plates that I will be making myself. And you can find that at everythinghamradio.com /store. That pretty much wraps it up. You can find me on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. Pretty much everything is everythinghamradio.com. Except for Twitter, it's K5CLM. So definitely please join the Facebook group. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on YouTube. And once again, I greatly appreciate y'all listeners. Y'all are the best. So until next time, this is K5CLM signing out. 73, y'all.